welcome to the ICT Pulse Podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Today we are thrilled to have Shernon Osepa, Manager of Regional Affairs for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Internet Society, ISOC. Prior to joining ISOC, Shernon was the Manager, Regional Relations Caribbean for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN. He was also a policy advisor with the Telecommunications and Post Regulatory Authority in the Netherlands Antilles and worked with the local incumbent telecommunications operator in Curacao. Shernon is a national of Curacao, where he's still based. Shernon, welcome to the ICT Pulse Podcast.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and honor to be on your programs.
So let's just start with ISOC. Give us a sense of what ISOC is about and what does it do?
Internet Society, ISOC as we call it, is a global organization focusing on three main areas. It's what we primarily do is to focus on development of the internet, but not just only the internet. We are focusing on the development of an open internet, an internet of opportunity. And we do this by focusing on three main areas. The first area is what we call standard development. So we develop internet-related standards. You may have a lot of organizations out there that are focusing on all kinds of other standards, but Internet Society, through what we call the Internet Engineering Task Force, is focusing on internet-related standard development. So all the IPv4, IPv6, autonomous system numbers, all these were developed by what we call the Internet Engineering Task Force, of which Internet Society is the organizational home. So that's the first thing that we do. The second one is focusing on policy development. And when you talk about policy development, we are not only talking about technical matters, but we are also talking on other areas, such as freedom of speech, and open access to the internet, and all the other discussions that you may find. And the third area that Internet Society is quite active on is what we call capacity building and education. With capacity building, we would like to have our own people in the region taking the lead and help us to develop the internet in our region much better. So that's what Internet Society is doing. We do have a regional bureau in Montevideo, Uruguay, but we have also other bureaus all around the globe, and the head office is in Washington, D.C. So that's basically what Internet Society is, and I'll be happy to continue elaborate a bit more on that.
Okay. So as, the regional manager for Latin America and the Caribbean, I trust that you cover several countries. What does your job entail? I know that we have been talking for a little while trying to coordinate this interview, and you have been traveling quite a bit. So just give us a sense as to what you do in your role at ISOC.
Yes, basically as the manager of regional affairs for Latin America and the Caribbean, what I'm trying to do is to maintain and initiate, let's say, contact with key stakeholders and to inform them with respect to what are the developments that we are seeing, let's say, within the internet arena, and also to hear from them what are the challenges that they are facing in order for us to work on that. In that regard, I do engage, let's say, with governments because they are very important, because they are the ones, let's say, that are focusing on policy issues in their particular country. I'm also engaged, let's say, with what we call the business community, and especially given that here you have, let's say, where the money is being generated. So we have to focus on that as well, the business community. Very important, we also focus on what we call the academia. Here you have all the bright minds, people who can help us to develop and to enhance the internet that we are using nowadays. And not to forget, let's say, civil society organizations, because just people like you and me that are users of the internet, they can also give us some very good indications in which direction we should go. So these are the stakeholders that we are engaged with, and we are trying to help them and also to learn from them what can be done better.
So, and you've been with ISOC, I gather it's about 10 years. I'm thinking, though, that you would have seen the region evolve and transform over that time, especially as it relates to the internet access, internet use. I mean, what have been your observations from the time, let's say, you started with ISOC and now?
Okay, it looks like I've been with ISOC for 10 years, but it's 6 years that I have been with Internet Society.
Oh, okay.
But within the internet ecosystem, let's say with ICANN and ISOC, I've been, let's say, 10 years doing this job. But with Internet Society, it's 6 years. What we have done since we started, and if we compare, let's say, the in the beginning and right now, we have been focusing a lot on, let's say, to raise awareness on all internet issues. For example, in the Caribbean, access is still an issue. It's not only about access, but it's about affordable access to the internet. It depends. You may have some countries that are well connected, but some others, it's a challenge. It's the internet is much more expensive. It's based on the structure of the country, but generally speaking, we have been focusing a lot on access, and we're still focusing on that, because if you look globally, we have a bit more than 3 billion people connected to the internet. So we still have, let's say, more than 3 billion that still need to be connected to the internet. So that is why access is very important. In the Caribbean itself, for example, cybersecurity is an issue. We know that, for example, others from outside the region are using, for example, the Caribbean as their playing ground, where they come and they get, let's say, acquainted with how they can do this stuff. And then based on that, they go into other regions to execute what they have learned in the Caribbean. So cybersecurity is an issue that we need to focus on. General, let's say, internet governance. When we talk about internet governance, we're looking at all kinds of issues. Internet economy development, that's also very important. We have seen some more development in this regard, especially if you look at other regions, for example, at Europe, USA, they are using the internet mostly to generate, let's say, money, right? And we in the Caribbean, still, we are just users. We're just using the internet, but we are not much of the time thinking, how can we make money out of this? And internet economy is part of that, of those discussions that we have been focusing on. For example, you may be acquainted with the peering forum that we have in the Caribbean. This was an initiative by Bevel Wooding from PCH back then and myself, that we were discussing how can we get, let's say, the Caribbean engaged in more internet economy development, and we came up with the peering forum. So these are the things that we have seen development in the last, let's say, 10 years, as you did mention it, and that we still need to focus more on to make it better. So awareness is still very, very important, to raise awareness, especially with governments and other decision takers, in order for us to move on.
Excellent. So just going back on the issue of the internet economy. So what are some of the challenges or issues that you've been seeing, which is why the region probably has not developed as much along that front?
I think it's a better understanding of how the internet itself functions. Because if you don't know how it functions, if you look at the business of internet, the business of internet is in a very simplistic way explained, is just the business of transporting, let's say, packets from one network to the other. So that's, in a very, very high level, that's what's the internet is all about. But we haven't learned as yet how to transport, let me call it, the dollars, the money itself. So we have We have been focusing on packets, but how can we use these packets to generate money? And these are the things that, for example, they are doing in Europe and in the US, for example. So the internet is just a tool. We need to find ways how to generate some new business models. And we do have in the Caribbean some people who are very knowledgeable, but still we need to find a more structural way how we can get others engaged and to share, let's say, knowledge with them in order for them not to just use the internet as users, to just to Google and to Facebook and these kind of things, but to use it in a much more productive way so that we can focus a bit more on help develop, let's say, the internet economy in the Caribbean as well.
And I guess it sort of dovetails into this report that ISOC had published last year on the internet in the Caribbean. And I just wanted to know, as you and I both know, I was one of the contributors to the report. But at the same time, I think it would be useful for us to get a sense as to, as the manager for regional affairs, what was your experience like in having that report produced for the Caribbean, on the Caribbean, and I gather that you would have been, a key actor in actually getting this report to life. So what was that experience like for you, and what has been the impact of the report since it was published last year?
Yes, first of all, what we're trying to do with all the reports that we are publishing is not just to publish a report. What we're trying to do is to focus on, let's say, tools and other instruments that key decision makers and policy makers can use to help them, let's say, and all of us, let's say, to enhance the internet in the Caribbean, and also to have a much better experience with the internet. So it's not about the report itself. It's about what can be done to make, let's say, the Caribbean much better in that regard. And what we have seen, for example, you were, as you did mention, you were also one of the key contributors to this report. What we have seen is that, for example, governments have started to make a reference to this report. Several of them have been using it, and I think this is the most important thing. This is why we have done this, to develop a report that people can use, not only read it, but can use and focus on the recommendations and to see how they can improve, let's say, the internet experience and to make the internet better in the Caribbean. So for me, I would say people are using it and they are focusing on the recommendations to make these things happen.
Okay, great. Just coming back out of all that you have witnessed in the region so far, what do you think should be the region's priorities? Some of them may have been identified in the report based on its own context, but you have been going around really witnessing all that has been happening in the region, talking with the governments, businesses, and other stakeholders. What do you think our priorities in the Caribbean should be as it relates to internet and internet development?
Still, as I did mention, we need to focus on, let's say, access to the internet, but not only just access, but broadband access, because sometimes people are promoting, let's say, access to the internet, but if you look at the speeds that they are providing, it's very low, and you cannot do anything. Almost you can't do anything with those speeds. So it's very important that we focus on broadband, real broadband, and there are a few definitions out there for broadband. So people can use, let's say, real broadband for to help us, let's say, focusing on economic and social development. So I would say broadband, real broadband, not just high-speed internet access, but real broadband. That's one of the things that we should be focusing on, and at affordable price. Cybersecurity is also very important because, as I did mention before, the region is being used as a playing ground by, let's say, global hackers. And the one of the theme that I like the most is also, let's say, the internet economy development. So we need to find ways how to get especially our youngsters engaged in getting to know, let's say, how the internet functions, how it works, and not only technical matters, but also the business model out of it, and how they can develop, let's say, their own business model to generate some money using the internet. For example, if you look at the country codes top level domain names, for example, the case of Trinidad and Tobago, that's .tt. In the case of Jamaica, .gm. We, and that's also applicable, let's say, to other Caribbean islands. We are not really using these local domain names in an effective way, you know. And if you look at these domain names, they are, let's say, the identification of that country to the internet. So we need to find some way how we can use all these local domain names, you know, to get more visibility for our countries. Just imagine what would happen if we have all these youngsters where their own websites from their particular countries, you know, that's something that they will be very proud of. And instead of just using Facebook, it's just important to use Facebook, but I mean, just imagine all these youngsters with their own websites. They will start competing with each other in a positive way. I'm from St. Lucia, for example. You're from Jamaica. Look my website, you know. But we need to give them the tools, and I think that's something that can be done. It can be explored to help, let's say, develop, let's say, the internet economy that I'm talking about.
Absolutely. But just going back on this issue of the internet economy, one of the challenges, and even from my own experience, is the fact that in many of the Caribbean countries, the whole issue of electronic payment, e-commerce, still probably is not as developed as it should be. So you find that quite legitimately, there are people who have, let's say, internet-based businesses or want to use the internet to facilitate and strengthen the delivery of their goods and services, but they cannot do transactions online easily. What you tend to find is that you can certainly advertise and promote your products online, even via Facebook, other social media platforms, or through our website, but you cannot conduct the whole sale and purchasing transaction online through your website. And I have, spoken with a few people, and I recognize that this is a major hurdle that often results in them either finding routes or avenues outside of the region to try to advance their businesses. But it is something that not everyone is able to do. I mean, you have any thoughts about e-commerce and how that is affecting people's ability, the citizens and the young people that we are hoping that will be able to take advantage of the internet and the internet economy and really do something with it in the region?
Yes, I think I agree with you on in this regard, because without payment you cannot. When we talk about e-commerce, of course, you need to find a way how to pay for your goods that you're receiving or that you're selling. So that's very important. But this is also an opportunity, because whenever you have a challenge, just look globally, all these new developments that we have seen, all of them came out of challenges that some particular person, organization, or country, let's say, has been experiencing at that particular time. So I think I don't have the answer as yet, but I think we should come together, especially, let's say, Caribbean entrepreneurs. We should come together, and given that we do have a challenge in this regard, we should come together and see how we can let's say, address this challenge. I'm sure you may have also, let's say, others from outside of the region, maybe with a bit more experience in this regard. Let's say payment systems. They are willing also to help us, but we need to identify that and recognize that we have a challenge. And then once you have a problem, and you start focusing that I have a problem, how I'm going to solve this problem that I have, I'm sure we will reach with all the bright minds that we have in the Caribbean, we will come with some solutions as well.
No, absolutely. But it is definitely a challenge because I think from what I have observed and even my own experience is the fact that oftentimes, especially as an small business and an internet business and online business, where you are you're trying to be agile, you're trying to iterate very quickly, and the whole implementation of any sort of payment platform is very expensive, very complicated, and can be quite protracted. And here in the region, that really doesn't fit in with a lot of the business models that a lot of our young people and the more agile minded among us are trying to implement. So yes. I don't think that currently in the region we fully appreciate how business is being done in the 21st century. And hopefully, as you say, the brilliant minds among us may be able to come up with some sort of solution.
Yes. I think here we have a key role to play, and we should just, let's say, act as facilitators, come with all these bright minds, bring them together, and let's start a discussion. And I'm sure out of these discussions, we will reach agreement what would be the best path to be followed.
Absolutely. I just also want to touch on a separate note. And one of the reasons why, I thought of you for the podcast is that earlier in February, actually, you had written this article expressing grave concern about the fact that not enough was being done to reconnect Caribbean countries devastated by the hurricanes last year. What drove you to take that position so publicly? I know that you probably would have gotten reports from the various countries that you oversee as regional manager, but it really seemed as if it really struck a chord in you when I guess 5 months, 6 months after the hurricanes Irma and Maria, that the countries were still not as connected as they had been before.
Yes. Basically, what we have seen is that, when you have a disaster or natural disaster in a country or in a region, just after the let's say, the disaster, you get a lot of promises from people, organizations, and others from all around the globe. We are willing. How can we support you? These are the things that you heard from people from all around the globe. But after a few weeks, and then it will become, let's say, quiet in a very natural way, and you don't hear much more from all these global stakeholders, players, and regional, and all of them who promised, to focus, to help us to move on. So that is why back then, after a few months, we were thinking, okay, after a few months, where did we reach? What have we achieved so far after let's say 5 months back? And that's the main reason that I let's say did post that blog, to inform, let's say, the global community, and also to persuade them. Still, we have a region here that is not well connected after the, let's say, the natural disasters.
Yeah.
And just let's focus how we can help the region. It's not enough by just saying that you will be helping them, but let's act. Let's come together, and let's really help them in a structural way. So that was the rationale behind, let's say, my blog back then. And if we look at, for example, at natural disasters, you may have, for us at Internet Society, for example, as I did mention, access is very important. Access to the internet. You may have, let's say, intervention. Let's say internet shutdown. Let me call it like that. You may have internet shutdown by, let's say, natural disasters, but you may have also, let's say, internet shutdown by what I would call human intervention. For example, by governments. We have a few experiences around the globe where we have seen that, let's say, human intervention, where governments shut down, let's say, the internet. And that's not much different to, let's say, natural disaster. I mean, of course, natural disaster is something what we may call sometimes an act of God, but we can help. We can do something, and that's basically what I have been trying to do. How can we help the region? And you may have some technical matters that we can focus on, to build much more resilience and robust, let's say, telecommunication infrastructures. Because without telecommunication infrastructure, you cannot get, let's say, internet neither. So we need to focus on how can we make these telecommunication infrastructure much more robust. So that's the reason to answer your question. That's the reason behind that block back then.
As much as I take your point that in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, countries and organizations are all rallying to help, and then that quiets down. But I was wondering while you're speaking whether or not the countries themselves, especially looking at the impact of these hurricanes for us last year, being so devastated that you may have found that they themselves were challenged to coordinate the efforts needed in their own recovery. So, here it is that let's take a country like Dominica, whereby, you're struggling to get potable water to people, get, electricity back on. Maybe internet access or telecommunications access, as important as it is, and probably will help the recovery efforts. You may find that somehow, based on what might be considered the most immediate and urgent needs, that the countries themselves may not be able to fully focus on getting their countries back reconnected.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes. One of the challenges that we have seen is, let's say, lack of coordination. You may have some initiatives, but there was not like an overarching entity or body, let's say, coordinating what was going on. And remember, when you have a disaster going on in a country, those persons living in that country, it's a challenge for them. They cannot do anything because they need their roof just blown away or whatever. So they need to find ways how to protect themselves. So they cannot help themselves. So that is why you need coordination. That is why you need others from in the region, from non-affected countries, that should find a way how to help them. Right now, for example, in the Caribbean, there are a few initiatives going on. For example, the OACS, they have a commission on disaster risk management. I'm one of the, let's say, commissioners on that initiative as well. And what we will be looking at is, of course, what happens, but most importantly, recommendations to avoid these things to happen again. I mean, you cannot avoid, let's say, natural disasters, but you can at least make your telecommunications infrastructure much more robust. For example, I'm not going to mention particular country, but in a country, for example, we have seen that hurricane category 3 antenna was used, and we are living in a region that's quite vulnerable to natural disasters, to hurricanes, for example, in this particular case. So if we have had, for example, category number 5 antenna, for example, maybe that tower was still there, So and these are other things that we will be focusing on in our recommendations to governments. In addition to that, CANTO, Caribbean Association of National Telecommunication Operators, they too have a disaster risk management committee, on which I'm part of that committee as well, whereby we will be looking at these at what happened and how we can improve, let's say, telecommunication infrastructure as well. So I think right now the region is focusing, the Caribbean is focusing what can be done, but we need also assistance from others. Also, one of the other findings was that we need to find a structural way to get, let's say, funding, because sometimes people would like to send equipment, but maybe you get something that you already have, so we need to find a structural way how we can help the region, but with what we need, not just with someone who would like to send. So we need to find some more better ways how to coordinate all these efforts in order for us to give a contribution in that regard. Maybe I'll mention something as well. For example, at Internet Society, we will be working, or we have already started to work on what we call a disaster relief fund. It's not completely done as yet, but we are working on that. And the idea is to help, let's say, our members, chapters, and also others from affected, let's say, countries. So that's something that we are working right now on. And we also would like to have a volunteer group of people, of experts, and especially we have already had discussions with people from Mexico, for example, from Chile, from Ecuador, and from Haiti. Why are we focusing on these countries? Because these countries, they have, or they went through some natural disasters. So you have some experts living in these countries who can also contribute whenever, let's say, a storm or hurricane strikes in one of our Caribbean islands. So these are the things that we are doing from Internet Society. But there are other organizations as well that are doing a lot, and that is why we need coordination. Coordination in order for all of us to work together and to not to duplicate, let's say, each other's work, but to enhance what all of us can do to make the Caribbean better.
Understood. Two things though. One, I hate to break it to you, but the hurricane season for 2018 will soon be upon us. Do you think that by that time some of those initiatives would at least be bearing fruit? So, for example, whether or not it's being able to submit recommendations to government about some of the standards that they should be asking of their telecommunications providers with respect to towers. Where do you think that would we be able to get some benefit from some of these initiatives soon?
Yes, that's the aim. For example, the OACS, let's say, Disaster Risk Committee, we are working to provide, let's say, Caribbean governments with a document somewhere in April. So let's say final week of April, we should have that document, let's say, in place to give some, let's say, key recommendations to governments and that they can, let's say, use in their particular countries. Canto as well has some, for example, I know that in May, for example, of this year, they will be focusing on some, how would you call this, some examples to some best practices, sharing some best practices, how to enhance, let's say, telecommunication infrastructure. So from these two, let's say, entities, committees, we already have some, or we will be getting some guidelines what to do. And with these guidelines, I'm sure we are on the right path to at least to be better prepared. Of course, we do hope that nothing happened, but at least we to be better prepared if something may happen this year.
Okay. And the second question is about the chapters, because I know under the ISOC structures, and I think you may have mentioned it initially once when we started, that, one has these sort of groups that are associated with ISOC. And I gather that you're also looking to draw on the chapters to assist in the improvement of our disaster resilience. You have any thoughts, or has ISOC approached the chapters in any meaningful way about what assistance it believes that the chapters could provide to the effort?
Yes. If you look, for example, the countries that I did mention, Mexico, Chile, Ecuador, from the Caribbean, we have Haiti. But we will be using, let's say, chapters in a volunteer structure. So I did focus, for example, on the countries that I mentioned, Mexico, Chile, Ecuador, and Haiti, because we have a bit more experience with these countries when it comes to natural disasters. But from other chapters in the Caribbean, and also Latin America, we got a list of people who are willing to contribute in that regard. So we need to sort certain things out, because when you're working with volunteers, the idea is not to put, let's say, their lives at risk as well. So we need to look how to deal with this. But we have a number of people, and not only people who would like to contribute, but very knowledgeable people on telecommunications and internet, let's say, infrastructures that can help us to, let's say, maintain, let's say, connectivity during natural disasters. So this is one thing that Internet Society is doing. And the disaster relief fund that I did mention, this will become part of what we call the Beyond the Net one structure. Beyond the Net is more a structure where we, let's say, give funding to our chapters and members. So we are working on that right now. We don't have it completely ready, but we are working on that, on this disaster relief fund, in order for us to help, let's say, chapters or members in affected countries.
Oh, great. Just one more question from me is, we're well into 2018 now. It's amazing how time is flying. And outside of the focus on, improved disaster resilience in the region, what are ISOC's priorities in the Caribbean into the foreseeable future?
Internet Society will be focusing this year a lot on what we call campaigns, some campaigns. We will be doing some campaigns on 4 areas. We will be focusing, for example, on what we call community networks. With community networks, what we are trying to do is not to replicate, let's say, existent, let's say, telecommunications infrastructure, but especially in rural areas where there is no connectivity. And then we, together with the community, with our members, with our chapters, with all who would like to give a contribution, we are trying to develop what we call these community networks. We do have in the Caribbean some very large countries, and for example, Guyana, Suriname, and you have some others as well, whereby we would like to focus on getting especially people living in rural areas to give them access to the internet. Again, it's something that should be done by the community, so with all local stakeholders, and ISOC will be contributing in that regard as well. The second campaign that we will be focusing a lot on is what we call IoT, Internet of Things security. And why are we doing this? It's because whenever we connect a device to the internet, sometimes we don't realize that, but whenever we connect a device to the internet, it becomes part of the global internet that we're using. So that is why it's very important for us to focus on IoT, Internet of Things security, in order for us to maintain and to keep that global internet safe. One other campaign that we will be focusing on is what we call the manners, mutually agreed norms on internet routing security. And why are we doing this? If you look at the internet, for example, the routes that we are using, or that networks are using, to connect, let's say, one infrastructure for one network to the other, it's very, very important. And if these are not well protected, we can also bring some, let's say, some threats to the internet that we're using nowadays. And also not to forget what we call the multi-stakeholder model. So we would like to continue focusing on that to get all stakeholders working together. The internet is what it is nowadays due to the multi-stakeholder model, whereby all stakeholders contribute: governments, technical community, academia, civil society. So that's also part of our campaigns. So we will be focusing on 4 campaigns, and we will be doing the same thing in the Caribbean as well, focusing on these campaigns.
All right. Well, Shernon, I think that's about it from me today. I know that you are most likely going to be traveling across the region. Clearly, you have a number of countries under your purview, so you probably won't be at home for very long. Do you have any final thoughts that you might want to share before we sign off?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me for this interview. And I would like also to congratulate you with what you have been doing in the Caribbean, and not only the Caribbean, the world. I know that people from outside of the Caribbean are, sometimes they're asking me about your publications. They're reading your publications. They are making reference to your publications. So, as someone from the Caribbean, and you are someone from the Caribbean as well, I would like to congratulate you in that regard and keep on with the good work.
Thank you so much, Shernon. As you can appreciate, ICT Pulse has been a labor of love for me for quite a while now. I think this is 2018, so it turned 7 in January. And I'm glad that at least, in some part, I've been able to contribute to us getting a better appreciation of telecommunications and ICT in the region. And just going back to one of your earlier statements, I think really to try to empower us to see ourselves more than just consumers of technology, but being able to shape and harness it ourselves. So again, just thank you so much once again for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us and helping us to get a better understanding of the Internet Society and its work in the region.
Thanks to you.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.